encourager les autres à faire la même chose. Keeping our distance was hard, but we followed the rules. It has been difficult, but we have persevered. Canada has persevered. But like most Canadians, I've been watching the news for months with the fear that we'll have to do it all over again as we saw the Delta wave slowly growing. I and others said very clearly that calling an election in the middle of the pandemic was not the right thing to do. Mr. Trudeau did not listen. Mr. Trudeau put himself first. Les autres chefs et moi, on a clairement dit qu'une élection en pleine pandémie n'était pas la bonne chose. M. Trudeau n'a pas écouté, mais M. Trudeau a pensé à lui-même avant les autres. Like most Canadians, I was alarmed by Dr. Tam's briefing yesterday. Not just because of the rising caseloads, not just because the government seems more interested in campaigning for a majority than managing our health crisis, but because we now find ourselves in the middle of a fourth wave with caseloads exploding. What's done is done, but we urgently need a path out of this crisis. Today, Canada's Conservatives have one. Right now, this is a time for all of us to come together. A time for us to focus not on what is convenient politically, but on what is right. There are 4 things that Canadians need right now. 4 steps that we should unite around, rather than seeking to divide our country. Pour le moment, on doit unir nos forces. On doit se concentrer sur ce qui est bon. On doit mettre de côté les divisions et ce qui est politiquement avantageux. Pour le moment, les Canadiens ont besoin de 4 choses. 4 mesures pour unir le pays au lieu de le diviser. The first is information. Let's be clear. This was an extremely foreseeable risk. I have no doubt that the scientists and public health officials monitoring this crisis have the best intentions, that they wanted to let us know. But Canadians are right to ask why only now we are receiving updated figures and modeling, and why they stopped when an election was called. They're right to ask why families across the country weren't given the information to help them decide what risks to take, whether to go to the office or mall, or whether to stay home. The briefings should resume regularly, no matter how bleak, no matter how inconvenient for the government of the day. Les Canadiens ont le droit de demander pourquoi ils reçoivent maintenant des données à jour. Pourquoi ils ne recevaient pas de données quand l'élection était déclenchée. Ils ont le droit de demander pourquoi ils n'ont pas reçu l'information qui leur aurait permis de décider des risques à prendre pour aller au travail ou au centre commercial. Il faut fournir de l'information régulièrement, peu importe si elle est positive ou négative, et peu importe si c'est bon pour le gouvernement. If we believe in science, then we must let it be heard. And I, for one, will always be listening. The second measure is fairness. It's in knowing that the sacrifices that Canadians are making aren't in vain, and that everyone is following the rules. We got through the worst of the pandemic by everyone doing their part. La deuxième mesure est l'équité. Les Canadiens doivent savoir qu'ils n'ont pas fait ces sacrifices pour rien et que tout le monde suit les règles. On a traversé le pire de la pandémie car tout le monde a fait sa part. Nothing compromises the united approach we need more than people thinking the rules don't apply to them. Us politicians, we should be leading by example. Canada's Conservatives have used this as our guiding principle throughout this campaign. We've done more telephone town halls than ever before, and we've developed new, innovative approaches to develop our democracy while keeping Canadians safe. We've committed to a policy which protects Canadians through vaccines and rapid testing while respecting individual health choices. And crucially, we haven't broken the rules, then sought to explain it away. We will lead by example, and others should do the same. On a adopté une politique pour protéger les Canadiens. On a utilisé des vaccins et des tests de dépistage rapides tout en respectant les choix de chacun. Et surtout, on n'a pas enfreint les règles pour s'expliquer après. On va donner l'exemple et les autres devraient faire la même chose. We're all in this together. Third, we need to emerge from this crisis united, not divided. So let me be frank. The single worst thing I or any other leader could do is turn a question of public health into one of political division. Troisièmement, on doit sortir de cette crise. On doit sortir unis, non pas divisés. Je vais être clair. La pire chose que je peux faire, ou les autres leaders, est de transformer une question de santé publique en division politique. As we look around the world, the places that have fared the best are the ones which seek to understand why some people are nervous and try to persuade them to trust vaccines, our best route out of this crisis. We should ask ourselves whether Canada really wants to import divisive vaccine politics that we've seen elsewhere. Do we really want to approach questions of public health with politics rather than science? Do we want public officials to promote an us versus them approach at a time we should be uniting together against a fourth wave? I'm focused on bringing us together, not tearing us apart. Est-ce qu'on veut vraiment aborder les questions de santé publique avec la politique plutôt que la science? Comme Premier ministre, je veux nous unir, pas nous diviser. You don't win people over by threatening them. You win them over by reaching out, talking to them, understanding their fears, answering their questions. We need to persuade every Canadian that vaccines are safe, effective, and our best route out of this crisis. So for those of you out there who haven't yet, please get vaccinated. But if you're someone who is worried or having second thoughts, I hear you. We haven't done enough to assuage your fears. And sometimes you've been talked down to. But please trust us. Please listen to us. We are here to protect you and your families. Alors, je demande aux gens de se faire vacciner. Mais si vous êtes inquiet, ou si vous doutez, je vous entends. On n'a pas fait assez pour diminuer vos craintes. Parfois, on ne vous a pas écouté. Mais faites-nous confiance. Écoutez-nous. On est là pour vous protéger et protéger vos familles. We will give you the information you need, and we will work with you to help you protect yourself and to protect others. Finally, cooperation. The way we do all of this is to work together, to work with the provinces and premiers to find a solution that is meaningful and sustainable. Finalement, la coopération. On doit travailler ensemble, travailler avec les provinces pour trouver une solution sensée et durable, to act like grown-ups rather than lecturing, sniping, and bickering. Canadians deserve better than that. We all need to row in the same direction. We need to work together to understand the steps that are needed to contain, control, and eradicate COVID. We need to work together to deliver more vaccines, track outbreaks, and manage crises. I won't squander that chance. On doit travailler ensemble pour donner plus de vaccins, suivre les éclosions et gérer les crises. Je ne vais pas rater cette chance. Information, fairness, unity, cooperation. This shouldn't be the discussion we're having in the middle of an election, but it is, and we need to work together. I won't do what is convenient politically, but what is right. Information, équité, unité, coopération. On ne devrait pas parler de ça pendant une élection, mais c'est ce qui arrive. Mais on doit travailler ensemble maintenant. Je ne veux pas faire ce qui est pratique sur le plan politique. Je veux faire ce qui est juste. And that means focusing on solutions, not seeking to divide our country. It means being straight with the country, rather than saying one thing and doing another. We need better, so I'll level with Canadians. There are no easy solutions, but we must all do our part if we are to get through this together. I will do my part, and I hope you'll join me in taking the right precautions, in getting vaccinated, in treating each other with kindness, understanding, and compassion, and in protecting our country. Je vais faire ma part, et j'espère que vous êtes avec moi pour prendre les bonnes décisions, vous faire vacciner, traiter les autres avec gentillesse, compréhension et compassion, et protéger notre pays. I'll take questions in a moment, but first, I want to recognize that today marks 1,000 days that Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor have been held by the Communist Party in China. The thoughts of all Canadians are with them and their families today. We need a government that will stand up for them, for all Canadians, and for Canada's values. D'abord, je veux reconnaître qu'aujourd'hui marque les 1000 jours que Michael Kovrig et Michael Spavor ont été détenus par le Parti communiste chinois. Mes pensées et ceux de tous les Canadiens sont avec eux et leurs familles aujourd'hui. Nous avons besoin d'un gouvernement qui les défendra, qui défendra tous les Canadiens et les valeurs du Canada. Thank you. Je vous remercie.
We will be taking questions. Alors, on va prendre les questions. Première question.
Bonjour, M. O'Toole, Louis Blouin de Radio-Canada. J'aimerais vous entendre sur certaines contradictions. Vous dites que vous êtes inquiet de la hausse des cas au pays, alors qu'on est en train de voir des hausses significatives dans des provinces comme l'Alberta et la Saskatchewan, qui sont dirigées par des premiers ministres conservateurs, où les mesures sanitaires ont été jugées insuffisantes par les experts. D'autre part, vous dites, on veut donner l'exemple, on veut montrer l'exemple, faire la bonne chose, mais vous-même, vous ne demandez pas à vos propres candidats d'être vaccinés. N'êtes-vous pas, M. O'Toole, en train de donner raison aux libéraux qui disent que vous allez regarder cette crise-là les bras croisés?
Comme j'ai dit dans mon discours, on doit travailler ensemble contre la quatrième vague. C'était inacceptable d'avoir une élection en pleine d'une pandémie, mais nous sommes ici et on doit travailler ensemble. Chaque niveau de gouvernement, les provinces, les municipalités et les gouvernements fédéraux contre les COVID-19. Ce n'est pas le temps pour diviser les Canadiens, c'est le temps de travailler ensemble. Et comme j'ai dit, notre campagne, on a une campagne sécuritaire pour les événements en personne et virtuellement. Et on a une règle pour les vaccins et les tests de dépistage quotidiens. On doit travailler ensemble pour informer et éduquer les Canadiens à se faire vacciner. Et ça serait mon approche comme leader.
Right, in English, please.
We must work together in this fourth wave of the pandemic. It's not a time to divide people, and that's what I said in my remarks. It's a time for all levels of government to work together, municipal, provincial, federal, to fight COVID-19, to get vaccination levels up to 90%. That is our goal. And we're going to do that by respecting one another, by informing, by educating, by tackling questions people have, not by dividing Canadians. This is a time for unity. The fight is not over. We need to work together to beat COVID-19.
M. O'Toole, j'aimerais revenir sur la question des armes à feu, si vous le voulez bien. Pouvez-vous regarder dans les yeux ce matin les familles, les survivants du massacre de Polytechnique et leur expliquer pourquoi vous renverseriez la décision des libéraux d'interdire le Ruger Mini 14, l'arme qui a été utilisée le 6 décembre 1989 pour tuer 14 femmes. Pourquoi, à vos yeux, est-ce acceptable de légaliser, d'autoriser la vente de cette arme-là?
Je vais maintenir l'interdiction pour les armes d'assaut. Et je vais être là pour les victimes et leurs familles. Et c'est pourquoi on a un plan contre les gangs de rue, contre
C'est une arme inoffensive, le Ruger Mini 14?
contre les risques pour les Canadiens dans nos grandes villes. Après les fusillades à Montréal, ici à Vancouver, on doit cibler les risques et travailler ensemble. Malheureusement, M. Trudeau est en train d'utiliser des politiques du style américain en plein de cette élection. Je vais être là pour la sécurité publique de tous les Canadiens et Canadiennes.
Next question.
Ashley Burke, CBC News. You've been playing with semantics, saying that you would maintain the ban on assault weapons rather than saying assault-style weapons. Why do you intend to legalize the assault-style weapons like the M14 used in Moncton in 2014 to shoot 5 RCMP officers, killing 3? The Breda Storm used in 2006 mass shooting at Dawson College in Montreal. The Ruger Mini 14 that was used to kill 14 women during the Polytechnic Massacre. Why do you intend to legalize these specific semi-automatic weapons?
As I've said, we will maintain the ban on assault weapons. And it's very upsetting to see Mr. Trudeau trying to import American-style politics, particularly on an issue of public safety, when we're actually talking about the 20% increase we've seen in violent shootings under Mr. Trudeau, largely from criminal gangs and organizations, and largely from the smuggling of firearms from the United States. That is what we are going to tackle, and I want families and victims to know that the Conservative Party is going to work on public safety in a way that's effective, that's targeting where the risks are, and not trying to cause division or mislead people as the Liberals have been doing throughout this entire campaign.
There are people arguing that you are misleading people by saying statements like that. The Polytechnic Massacre victims' families are upset by what you've been saying. What do you say to them specifically today about intending to legalize a Ruger Mini 14 that killed their loved ones?
I will tell them and all Canadians, we will maintain the ban on assault weapons. We will not try and import American-style politics because Canada has a very different system than the United States, and we have to maintain that. And as I've said in Canada's recovery plan, we also need a public and transparent discussion of our classification system to show Canadians that we will keep a focus on keeping people safe, keeping firearms out of the hands of criminals, and actually having severe penalties for using a firearm to commit violence against another Canadian. Mr. Trudeau's lowering the penalties for those types of offenses. So I want people to know that public safety is a priority, and we're going to focus where we need to on street gangs, on the illegal smuggling of firearms from the United States, which has a very different set of regulations than Canada.
En français, s'il vous plaît.
On doit avoir une approche claire sur les armes à feu et nos règles, parce que nos règles sont totalement différentes que les Américains. Et malheureusement, M. Trudeau a utilisé les attaques de style américain pendant cette campagne. C'est inacceptable. On va maintenir l'interdiction sur les armes d'assaut et on va avoir une revue publique et transparente sur notre système de classification. C'est dans notre plan pour le rétablissement du Canada. Et on va avoir des fonds pour les policiers de stopper la contrebande et les gangs de rue.
Next question.
Mr. O'Toole, Mike Liqueur from Global National. You talk about transparency, but I'll note that you're not exactly being transparent on what guns you will or won't ban. So I'm going to ask you this. The Beretta CX4 Storm was used in the Dawson College shooting. What do you say to the victims of that tragedy about why you don't think that particular gun should be banned?
I will say to those Canadians that we will maintain a ban on assault weapons.
Should that gun be banned?
As I've said, we will also have, and it's in our policy, a transparent and public review of our classification system, because Mr. Trudeau is trying to import US-style attacks here when we have a very different system than the United States. And I want the public to have confidence in that, and that's why we've said that we will have that review, focusing on public safety and focusing on getting the guns out of the hands of criminals that are being smuggled in from the United States. This problem has gotten worse every year under Justin Trudeau. We're going to focus on stopping it, keeping communities safe, and working with victims. So that is our approach, not the US style of division that we're seeing Mr. Trudeau every week of this campaign use to divide Canadians. We're going to focus on keeping Canadians safe.
So just as a follow-up, the Ruger Mini 14 was in the possession of the shooter in Nova Scotia. Can you explain to the victims why you think a public review is needed at this point to say why that gun was dangerous if it was in the hands of that shooter?
Well, the terrible attack in Nova Scotia hit close to home because it was not far from where my wife grew up. And it's another example of why we need a public discussion. Mr. Trudeau tried to stop the public inquiry of that terrible attack in Nova Scotia because the perpetrator, who was a known public safety risk, had obtained firearms illegally from the United States. He tried to stop the inquiry because he didn't want to focus on where the problem is. The problem is the smuggling of weapons from the United States, which have very different rules to Canada. We need to stop that. We've seen the border be completely porous under Mr. Trudeau. We have to strengthen our border, work with police, and also work with criminal organization and street gang projects of police to keep the shootings we've seen in our big cities to fight against them. On doit travailler avec nos policiers contre les gangs de rue et on doit avoir une approche transparente sur notre système. Et c'est pourquoi une enquête publique pour l'attaque en Nouvelle-Écosse est importante parce qu'il a utilisé les armes à feu illégaux. Et M. Trudeau a essayé d'avoir un camouflage sur ça et on doit avoir un processus transparent sur notre système. Et dans notre plan, on va donner les fonds pour les policiers de stopper le contrebande et d'avoir une approche sérieuse contre les gangs de rue dans nos centres-villes.
Next question.
Good morning, Jacob Serban, the Canadian Press. Mr. O'Toole, you've mentioned several times you want to be transparent about guns, you want the public to have confidence in gun policy. On Thursday night, when you said you'll maintain the ban on assault weapons, when you denied that your platform would legalize the gun used in the Polytechnic shooting, when you repeated that again in English yesterday morning, and again today, that you would maintain this assault weapons ban, do you think the ordinary Canadian realizes you're talking about a bill from 1977?
Well, I'd invite people. On the first full day of our campaign, we launched Canada's Recovery Plan, which is our plan to get the economy back on track and tackle the issues facing our country. And it will maintain a ban on assault weapons, and it will have a public and transparent approach to reviewing our classification system. Because I do think that Mr. Trudeau tries to divide people, tries to use people's lack of awareness of our system versus the United States. And he's importing US-style divisive politics in this campaign that we're not going to do. We've said clearly, and I said this in Montreal, and I'm saying it again here in the Lower Mainland, both have seen massive increases in street gang activity, brazen daytime shootings with criminal organizations using firearms obtained illegally. We're going to target and stop that. It's been going up under Mr. Trudeau. So our plan is transparent. It's not based on dividing or misleading people, which has been the approach of Mr. Trudeau, and it will take a serious approach on public safety. On va avoir une approche sérieuse en ce qui concerne la sécurité publique. C'est important pour tous les Canadiens, tous les Canadiennes. C'est pourquoi c'est dans notre plan pour le rétablissement du Canada, notre approche contre la contrebande, contre les gangs de rue. Et on va avoir un processus transparent sur notre système de classification parce qu'on a un système totalement différent que les États-Unis. Et c'est très important d'avoir une approche sérieuse sur la santé, sur la sécurité publique et pas une approche de division comme M. Trudeau.
On another subject, this morning you said you're going to introduce a national proof of vaccination system. We've seen several provinces introduce vaccination or proof of vaccination systems, some which adhere to international standards and may be usable in other countries, some of which aren't. How are you going to integrate these systems into this national system?
Well, thank you. Today we're setting a few ambitious targets, the biggest of which is to get our vaccination rate up to 90%. We've launched a number of measures that the federal government can use to do our part. The provinces have a series of systems of proof of vaccination, QR codes, vaccine passports. We will respect what the provinces are doing, partner with them to make sure that we have that for foreign traveling by Canadians. But the key thing I want people to take away, after hearing Dr. Tam's troubling numbers yesterday, we all have a role to play in our fight against this fourth wave of COVID. I'm pledging to do mine, and I want Canadians, if you have questions about vaccines, their safety, their efficacy, let's work on addressing those concerns, not by dividing Canadians, but working together, digging deep to fight COVID.
Next question.
Mr. O'Toole, good morning. Omar Sachina from CTV News. Canadians want a Prime Minister they can trust and who is direct with them. You have had multiple chances yesterday, you've had multiple chances today to clarify your position on assault weapons, and yet it took pro and anti-gun advocates to try and fill in the blanks, to try and explain a significant party position of a party you lead. What does that say about how you would lead as Prime Minister?
Well, Omar, on the first full day of this campaign, we launched Canada's recovery plan,
But the question
which
wasn't
will let
about the
everyone
recovery
fill
plan.
in the blanks. This is about our approach to targeting the risks facing our cities, whether it's Toronto, Montreal, or Vancouver, targeting criminal gangs, targeting the illegal firearm smuggling from the United States, and, as I said, to have a public review, transparent, involving Canadians, about our system here in Canada, the classification. We're having additional measures to allow physicians and health officials to remove someone's access to a firearm. We're also having additional measures towards people that are charged with an offense to be able to have their firearms surrendered. We have a serious approach to actually tackle the issue here. Mr. Trudeau, by mentioning the NRA and all the politics of the United States, is dividing people, misleading people. That's been their approach. That's not our approach. We put out our plan, and we intend to keep the public safe and to focus on where the problem is, which is illegally smuggled firearms from the United States.
I'm going to try again. I'm going to try to ask you a clear question, and I'm hoping for a clear answer. Is it fair to say, just so I understand your position once again, you want to allow lethal assault-style weapons that were banned in 2020? Yes or no? Is that accurate?
The assault weapon that the Liberals talk about when they're trying to divide people, we are maintaining the ban on assault weapons. And we're not going to be importing this type of divisive politics from the United States. We have a very different system in Canada to the United States. And we're going to add additional provisions to allow lawfully obtained firearms to be taken from people if there's a mental health or other security risk. We have funds to target criminal gangs and the illegal smuggling of firearms, to take these issues seriously, not by misleading people the way the Liberals try and do, but by actually tackling where the risks are facing our cities, facing our communities, and having a transparent approach to show Canadians how our classification system works and where we can make it better. On va avoir une revue publique sur notre système de classification pour les armes à feu parce que on doit avoir un système efficace et juste pour nos chasseurs, nos tireurs sportifs, mais en même temps avoir une approche ciblée sur les risques pour la sécurité publique, les gangs de rue, la contrebande. Et c'est pourquoi c'est dans notre plan une approche sans les attaques, sans l'approche de M. Trudeau qui est en train de diviser, tromper les Canadiens. On a une approche efficace, ciblée sur la sécurité publique.
Next question.
John Iverson, National Post. Mr. O'Toole, you said you were going to level with Canadians not more than 5 minutes ago. That position does not, it sounds, I think, disingenuous to many Canadians. The Liberals are trying to put doubt in the minds of voters. Do you think you've jeopardised your chances of winning this general election because you've pandered to the interests of a small number of gun owners?
I think the Liberals are trying to divide Canadians because they haven't offered a plan for the future of this country. Mr. Trudeau called an election in the middle of a fourth wave of a pandemic, with forest fires in BC, with the situation in Afghanistan, and has offered nothing more but misleading videos online, American-style attacks on public safety issues, and division throughout this campaign. We've been crystal clear. When it comes to public safety, we're going to give the resources needed for police to tackle organized gangs and criminals using illegally obtained firearms on our streets. We're going to maintain the ban on assault weapons and have a public review of our classification system for all Canadians. We will also have measures working with physicians and law enforcement to take even more steps to keep communities safe. This will be our approach. Serious policy on issues facing Canadians and their public safety, and not dividing and misleading Canadians as Mr. Trudeau has.
Next question.
Yeah, good morning, Mr. O'Toole. David Younger of Reuters. I was going to ask you about something else, but for my first question, I wanted to continue this topic. On page 90 of your plan, you say we will start by repealing the May 2020 order in Council. Could you please explain to us in as much detail as possible what the effect of that repeal would be?
As I've said, we're going to focus on keeping Canadians safe, not dividing them. So there's some people, sport shooters, hunters, target shooters, who have been caught up in an approach that Mr. Trudeau has brought that doesn't actually keep Canadians safe. We're going to have a public review of the classification system to show Canadians that we can focus on keeping Canadians safe without dividing Canadians. We're going to maintain the ban on assault weapons that has been there and give the tools needed for law enforcement to go after the real rise in shootings that we've seen in Montreal and Surrey and Vancouver, which has been from criminal gangs, street gangs, and organized crime, obtaining illegal firearms from the United States and using them to commit violent acts. On va avoir une approche ciblée sur les gangs de rue et les crimes violents dans notre grande ville avec la contrebande, les armes à feu illégaux. On va avoir une approche totalement transparente sur notre système de classification pour les armes à feu, pour les chasseurs, les tireurs sportifs, parce qu'on doit avoir une approche juste, ciblée sur la sécurité publique, pas ciblée sur la division politique, comme M. Trudeau.
And secondly, in your leadership campaign last year, you talked about the need to take back Canada. Do you still believe that message? And if so, who do you wish to take back Canada for and from?
Well, I'm fighting for Canada in this campaign, and Canada's recovery plan is about giving people that have been left behind under Mr. Trudeau a voice. People in the energy sector, the softwood lumber sector here in BC that has seen 7 or 8 mills close in the last few years with no softwood lumber agreement. There's a lot of Canadians worried about the future, worried about this wave of the pandemic. There's division in the country, people even giving up on our country after 6 years of Mr. Trudeau. Our slogan is to secure the future. We have a 5-point plan in Canada's recovery plan to do that, and I'm running a positive campaign by putting out our ideas to get the country back on track.
Next question.
Stephanie Levitz, the Toronto Star, good morning. I wonder what you make of the Liberals continuing to bring up, shall I say, the ghost of Stephen Harper in this campaign and trying to suggest that any connection between you and him is something Canadians should be afraid of.
Mr. Trudeau has no vision for the future of this country. He has no plan to get the country back to work, to deal with some of the national unity issues we have in our country. He has no plan to ever balance the budget. He's spending $424 million a day more than the country is bringing in. And he has a scandal-plagued record as a prime minister with 3 personal ethics investigations. He's going to talk about anything other than his record. I'm talking about Canada's recovery plan, our plan to put forward a way to get the country back on its feet, get people working, tackle the 4th wave, be more prepared, tackle the opioid crisis, mental health. So we want the country to be well economically and well from a family and a community level. And I'll put our plan and my approach out there on any occasion, and Mr. Trudeau only has distractions and division that he's been offering Canadians.
And just as my follow-up, I wanted to go back to the question of vaccination. There's a lot of folks in the country, who hear what you're saying, that we can't browbeat the people who don't want to be vaccinated, that we have to come at them with compassion. But there's another significant faction that says, no, they cannot be allowed to hold myself and my family, back from getting back into life. Why do they get the same freedoms as I do if they're deliberately choosing not to be vaccinated? So why are people who are choosing not to be vaccinated, why should they be treated equally?
I can certainly understand the frustration that some Canadians may have if they went out particularly very early on and got a vaccine. Thank you for doing that. It's important. But I don't think anyone wants to create this us versus them approach. And that's why I raised in my remarks today, our goal to hit 90% is to get everyone working together. And there's some Canadians that because of the unfair treatment of Indigenous peoples in our healthcare system, there may be hesitancy in some groups in our country. Let's address that. Let's work together to inform, to answer questions, to inspire people to play their part. All of this country has a role to play in fighting COVID-19. And the way we're going to do it is together, not divided. So channel the frustrations that you may have into helping people find out more about how vaccines can help us turn the corner. They're safe and effective for use. I encourage them every single day, and I think we have to work together to fight COVID-19, not allow ourselves to become divided as a country. On doit travailler ensemble dans la lutte contre la COVID-19. Et il y a des Canadiens, des Canadiennes avec les inquiétudes avec les vaccins. On doit parler sur ça. On doit informer et éduquer les Canadiens parce que tout le monde a un rôle dans notre lutte. Et on doit utiliser les vaccins. Les vaccins sont efficaces et sécuritaires. Et comme Premier ministre, je vais avoir une approche comme un rassembleur, d'éduquer les Canadiens pour le futur, pas avec une approche de diviser les gens sur une question sur la santé. On doit travailler ensemble dans la 4e vague pour le bien-être de tous les Canadiens.
This will be the last question. Ce sera la dernière question.
Good morning, Mr. O'Toole. James Yan, correspondent at The Economist magazine. I have a question about your foreign policy philosophy. If you become Prime Minister, in what concrete ways will your China policy be different from Mr. Trudeau's? Thank you.
Today marks 1,000 days that Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor are in prison as diplomatic hostages of the communist regime. There's a genocide happening against the Uyghur minority Muslim population in China. There's a police state that's been imposed in Hong Kong, violating the one country, two systems agreement. There are concerns with respect to intellectual property theft, international trade violations. We have to deal with the communist leadership in China as it is, not as Mr. Trudeau may have hoped it was. He's always been out of step with respect to our interests and our values. So I've said Canada will be a leader on human rights again, and we will be a strong partner in the Five Eyes and in our approach with respect to human rights, the rule of law, global trade, and there will be new leadership with a Conservative government.
Et voilà pour today. Ce sera tout pour aujourd'hui. Merci. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.
He's going on the It's fine. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye.